Nobody has an interest in that.
Okay.
No, if the goal is to get financial security, having a decentralized ledger is a horrible idea because you're vulnerable to anyone who might be able to wreck it for any reason. Now it's we're going back to currency blocks most likely. Now, whether that is asset backed or fiat depends upon the pros and cons of the political and economic system of each individual zone. I don't think fiat's going anywhere. It's not that it doesn't have risk. It's not that it's not potentially inflationary if it's managed badly. It's that there's really no other game in town. There isn't enough precious metals that is available to back a large scale asset system anymore unless we had significant economic dialing back, and I'm talking like an unwinding of 80% of the growth we've seen in the world since
Couldn't they just move
1945.
the gold?
That doesn't make it very fungible. When the asset itself explodes in value like that, it gets completely removed from the system. And so anything that has an industrial use, and gold has an industrial use, can't play. Well, you have to separate fiat pre-Bretton Woods and post. Pre-Bretton Woods fiat systems were the countries that, for whatever reason, couldn't play in the asset-backed world, and those all went to shit. In the post-Bretton Woods system, you're really talking about one currency. Everyone's currencies out there are basically backed by the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar is fiat.
Right.
Now, could we make the argument that the Fed could do a better job and that U.S. federal governments could do a better job? I don't think that's a hard case to make. But if you compare them to everyone else, the U.S. system has expanded its money supply by a proportion roughly equal to the size of the U.S. economy plus the value of all global trade. And it is very rarely deviated from that. But if you look at the other bigger currencies, the yuan, the yen, and the euro, they're there. And especially the yuan just doesn't do this, it just goes straight up. There's actually almost twice as much yuan in circulation today as there are US dollars, and the yuan is not a currency of exchange. It is not a store of value. It is almost held entirely within the mainland. So you can make the least dirty shirt analogy is probably broadly appropriate, but the other shirts are so filthy
Yeah,
that
I
it makes the
agree.
US Fed just look like a paragon of virtue. No, 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 no. Can't be both. Can't be both. All of the BRICS regularly manipulate their currency in order to achieve their national economic goals. So, which one gets to have the currency? And why would the others go for that? Or we had the big surge of 6 weeks ago. There's not an alternative, for better or for worse. If you want to participate in any sort of international trade, you need an intermediate currency that is not regularly involved in the trade. And since the United States never bet its economy on international trade, it really doesn't care what happens to the value of the dollar every day. But the Russians certainly care about what happens to the ruble, and the Chinese absolutely care about what happens to the yuan. That's a trading country cannot be the store of value. Yeah, unless the United States ejects them, which is fair, I would actually expect the US dollar to become more important because the US economy is becoming more and more focused on North America. It is less and less interested in what happens to the wider world economically, and that makes it a better store of value and a better medium of exchange. Now, you kick somebody like Russia out,
Haven't they been kicked out?
for the most part, yeah, especially the central bank. And have you seen how the Russians are handling their trade? They're loading up gold ingots into planes and flying them there. They're back to barter.
Right.
Then they have to find the new system, and the Russians, who have been talking about a non-dollar system for now 35 years, they're doing gold barter because that's the best option they've got.
Hmm.
Maybe there will be another one in the future, but for right now, this is as good as it gets.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
again, you need to have an impartial arbiter who doesn't care about the value of the currency. And everyone who's talking about moving beyond the dollar is a primary commodity exporter. They deeply care what the currency is.
Right.
There is no such thing as a decentralized ledger that anyone controls because you have to have access to the real financial system, and that can be ended in a day.
What do you mean you have to have real access to finance?
Change whatever is on the ledger for a currency that you can use in daily affairs, it becomes useless. And so one of the things that was going on between a lot of folks in the cryptocurrency back when the US Fed and the Euros and the Japanese were putting together the sanctions package for the Russian central bank, is they were told flat out that either you participate in these sanctions completely or you lose access to the real financial world. And Bitcoin and Ethereum and the rest are all interesting and everything, but if you can't actually cash it out anywhere, then they become worthless overnight.
Similar to the ruble. What do you do with the ruble, right?
Yeah, exactly. The ruble is now a completely sequestered currency that is no longer international traded. It doesn't have access to the system, although I might add it doesn't have access to even the Russian financial system anymore. So careful what sort of conclusions you make about ruble's strength versus weakness.
Right, but it is getting stronger, but to the point that we're both agreeing to.
Well, it's getting stronger
but good
in
luck,
a
right?
bubble. You can't. Anyone who has rubles can't trade them, and anyone who wants rubles can't get them. So in that sort of environment, it's really no longer a currency.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess time will tell if technology, can slowly grow and get a foothold and then grow. We're seeing it work in nations like El Salvador, but they're very small.
Oh, no, God, no, it has not worked in El Salvador.
People are using it to buy Starbucks and McDonald's and pupusas on the corner.
No, El Salvador is going to be applying for an IMF loan before the end of the year. That's ending very, very badly. I don't think it's ending badly because of Bitcoin. I think it's ending very badly for a number of reasons.
Sure. They were already ranked one of the poorest nations in the world long before their Bitcoin foray. So.
Yeah, just don't pin your hopes to that star. That's all I'm saying.
Oh no, I was only talking about on the part of actually buying goods and services with it is the point I was making. So. All right. Well, man, that was a lot to go through. I really appreciate it. You make me feel a little bit better about China because I've seen this colonization thing that's been scaring me, and then, like I said, the threat to nuclear war. So.
Well, I don't want to make you feel too secure about China because one of the problems with a one-man show is, we know what's going on in Russia. We have tapped Putin's phone. We are reading his email. Xi doesn't talk to anyone. There's no way to find out what he's thinking. We can't tap his brain. So if there is a kind of a black swan risk, that's where it would be.
I do have one more question, a threat. You had mentioned before, I think it was maybe it was the Arab Spring. I think Egypt had basically taken themselves off of the internet. Mm-hmm. And maybe as this deglobalization happens, some of these nations might be interested in turning themselves into intranets as opposed to being on global internet.
That's basically what the Russians have done.
So China's had this great firewall, but they've never actually decided to take themselves off of the internet. They've just more tried to control the data that comes in and out. But you see the potential of a threat of nations turning into private intranets and taking themselves off this global internet.
Yeah, I think a broad fracturing of the fracturing of the information space is kind of cooked in at this point. The question is, how big is the chunk that you can hive off? So, the Western Hemisphere writ large can be its own thing, maybe with a few connections to countries like the UK and Japan, for example. But the idea of a single World Wide Web, I think, is now on its way to the history or the ash heap of history. Obviously, the countries that you're identifying there are on the more authoritarian side that are likely to face extreme economic pressure, and being able to control the information space for them is a survival prerogative.